So there we're talking miracle. We're not talking about how wonderful the flight control team is. But anyway, the flight goes on to be very interesting. We landed at a spot on the moon called fittingly Oceanus Procellarum, Latin for Ocean of Storms. 600 feet away from the Surveyor-3, an unmanned spacecraft that landed there in 1967. And among the objectives of the flight, bring back instruments from the Surveyor as well as the lunar samples. So that's your story of Apollo 12. Read about that one if you're interested in pursuing something. Now, Gemini 8 and Apollo 12 are pretty fascinating and not often talked about. Apollo 13, of course, is, so I'll give you the brief version of what happens on Apollo 13. Third lunar landing flight, launched on April 11th, 1970. On the 13th of that month, having launched at 13:13 Greenwich Mean Time on the 11th, on the 13th, Apollo 13 encounters this problem. An oxygen tank explodes. We're 200,000 miles away from Earth, almost all the way to the moon, 56 hours into flight again, and that oxygen tank explodes. That happens in the service module. Service module is just beyond that guy that just took the pictures, the gray cylinder near the very front of the building. The point of the service module is you don't live in there. You live in the command module, which is just beyond it. You barely see the edge of it. But the service module provides everything that supports life for you. It gives you your propulsive capability, gives you your oxygen, your electrical power, your water supplies are all provided from the fuel cells in the service module. We've lost them. And this would normally be fatal, except that we're on our way to the moon and we are attached to a lunar module. And the lunar module obviously also has to have ability to sustain life, because it's going to sustain life for the 2 astronauts for the 2 days that they go down to the surface and come back. Unfortunately, we've got 3 astronauts, and it's going to take us about 4 days to get back from where we are. And so if you work that out, we've only got about 1/3 of the resources required to comfortably come back to Earth. So we're struggling with rationing out electrical power, water, oxygen, those things, and then the astronauts create their own problem with the unfortunate habit of always breathing out whenever they breathed in. This was not smart, because it put more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and carbon dioxide levels are getting dangerously high. At some point you'll pass out, and then at some point beyond that, you'll lose your life. And normally this is not an issue on a spacecraft because you've got something called a lithium hydroxide generator, and a chemical reaction takes place between lithium hydroxide and carbon dioxide, and the products of that reaction are lithium carbonate, which is a harmless powder, and water vapor, and everybody breathes normally and you're not even aware of it. You just don't even think about it, you're just breathing normally. But today you notice it because that system required the electrical power that you don't have. There's an equivalent system in the lunar module that you can use, but it is not engineered to do that job. And that thing has to be basically rebuilt in flight over a course of about 24 hours to be able to utilize it effectively to clear the air. One of the little subplots of the film, and a case where this drama that represents real life is often much more compelling than the fictional stories that Hollywood might make up. And so that's why that movie was as popular as it was. Anyway, we're going to go from here to the top of the 3rd stage, and then one final stop at the end of the building. In the very, very front, just beyond the gray part. Okay? The brown part, just beyond. Okay, so we're at the top of the 3rd stage now. Now, I'll give you a little more of a discussion on this than I might have otherwise, because just like there was a question. A gentleman pointed out on the base of the 3rd stage, these big silver balls on the inside. What the world are those things for? If you don't think about this, our 3rd stage burned some of its propellant to get us into Earth orbit. And then it stayed in weightlessness in Earth orbit for about 3 hours, so the propellants inside here began to slosh around. Well, you can't have sloshing propellants as you initiate a burn. you've got to pressurize the propellants so that the propellants are all forced in the direction of the nozzle. And the silver balls contain helium, the inert gas, which pressurizes the liquid oxygen, liquid hydrogen, without affecting it chemically in any way, and that allows those engines to then burn. And the third stage is going to burn a second time. It's going to burn for about 6.5 minutes. It's going to propel you out of Earth orbit on a path to the moon. It's going to accelerate you from about 17,500 miles an hour up to almost 25,000 miles an hour, which a student of analytic geometry will be interested to know is hyperbolic speed. Hyperbolic means, in a little simpler terms, Earth escape velocity. You leave Earth so fast that if nothing else intervenes, you will leave the Earth forever. Except that something will intervene, because we will rendezvous with the moon, and that'll slow us down, and that'll provide us the staging place from which to return to the Earth. The point is, it is really fast, leaving Earth. And as you leave Earth on the way to the moon, you're slowing down as you go toward the moon, because gravity is working against you. So you don't maintain that speed all the way to the moon. It takes you about 3 days to get to the moon. Which if you say it's 25,000 miles an hour, it will only take you 10 hours, but it takes you 3 days. Now, a little bit of orientation. Everything behind this in the building is launch vehicle. First stage, second stage, third stage. It's all propellant tanks and engines, all designed to get us up to the speeds required to conduct the objectives of the flight. Everything beyond this in the room is spacecraft. In the front, the service module, which we pointed out before, and the command module just beyond it, where the astronauts reside for most of the flight. The only exception being when 2 of them are going to enter the lunar module and head down to the lunar surface. That spacecraft, and then in this wonderful big empty truncated cone here, the lunar module adapter, is where the lunar module would be stored at liftoff. Close examination inside of there will reveal no lunar module. But that's where it would be. They built these steps up here so you can see there's nothing in there. But let's picture the lunar module again. Top part is the ascent stage. That's where you are if you're the pilot, and your docking port is above your head. Bigger descent stage beneath you, and then the 4 legs. So pick that whole thing up and stuff it in there. That's how we're configured at launch. That's how we're configured as we leave Earth orbit. But that's not the configuration that will allow us to enter lunar orbit. We've got basically 2 unconnected spacecraft, and we have to go through a maneuver that connects them. That is called transposition and docking. It happens shortly after we begin our trip to the moon. And what happens is the command and service module at the front push out away, actually separate, move out away, turn around 180 degrees so that the nose, instead of being pointed out, is pointed back in this direction. The 4 quarter panels that constrain the lunar module are jettisoned out to the side, and that exposes what? The docking port that's on the top of the ascent stage of the lunar module. So the nose of the command module then docks with that docking port, and now we've got the ability to move crew and equipment back and forth between the 2 spacecraft. Once that is secure, we jettison the 3rd stage, which will not come tumbling back to Earth, right? Because it's going hyperbolic speed away from Earth. It's leaving Earth forever. And in fact, it is on about the same trajectory we are. And we are going to follow a trajectory that, following Newton's laws, makes this beautiful arced S and goes around behind the moon, and it's a point directly opposite the Earth, behind the moon, where we burn the engine on the service module to slow us down to put us into orbit around the moon. Our 3rd stage will follow us along that path exactly unless we do something. So we take the residual propellants that are in the tank, we vent them to the side, that creates a little bit of a side force, and our trajectories begin to diverge. And the 3rd stage, instead of going behind the moon, will actually impact the front of the moon. And people have asked, why would we crash Saturn V 3rd stages into the moon? And it is the great science demonstration of all time. Every place that astronauts had landed on the moon, they deployed scientific instruments. Among those instruments are seismographs, things that measure earthquakes. We have the ability now to create one. As we have a 3rd stage, we know its mass, we know its velocity, therefore we can compute its kinetic energy. When it hits the moon big time, like a huge artillery shell, creates an impact crater about 150 feet wide, and that event is felt by all of the little seismographs at different points on the moon. And just like on Earth, where you might triangulate to find the epicenter of an earthquake, you triangulate these things, you learn something about the internal core structure of the moon from the various measurements that have come back. So that's why it was done.
Isn't it also space junk?
It is space junk.
But it's preventing space junk. Well, it's space junk, but on the...
Oh, yeah. It's just where do you want the junk to go?
Because otherwise it'd still be going, right?
It would all be in solar orbit if we didn't do that. That's right. And in fact, the third stages from Apollo 8 and Apollo 10 are in solar orbit.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Now, last point to be made here. We're passing the placards for Apollo 15, 16, 17. 17 was the last flight. 43 years ago now. You know, this would have been the second day of astronauts on the surface of the moon on Apollo 17, 43 years ago, 1972. But the point I'm trying to make on the last three flights is we had the use for the first time of this thing called the lunar rover. And the lunar rover is like this go-kart looking device. There's a picture of it directly opposite me, and some other pictures of it in action, like this go-kart looking device. And the idea is pretty elegant. You want to land on the moon in a big, flat, open field with nothing to make that add any risk. But that's not where you want to pick up the interesting samples. So using Apollo 15 as an example, we select a spot on the moon for a landing called Hadley Rill. And a rill, R-I-L-L-E, is like a deep-cut channel on the surface of the moon. What's it doing there? How did it get there? You know, so those are things that are interesting to the geologist, but you can't land right at the rill. That would be too risky. You land at the big open soccer field about 5 miles from the rill. You drive your rover to the edge of the rill, you pick up your samples, you come back. That's day one. Day two, you drive off in the opposite direction because about 7 miles in the opposite direction you encounter the base of the lunar Apennine Mountains, which rise about 13,000 feet above the surrounding plateau. Another interesting place. Those are the kind of things we could do on the last three of the Apollo flights using the lunar rover. Anyway, I will meet you under the command module and we'll finish our tour from up there.
Did they stuff the buggy in there too?
They stuffed the buggy on the underside of the lunar module. So that when the lunar module landed, it was in an equipped bay close to the ground.
This actually come apart, then they flipped around and back in. All of that is nothing, it was just detached. Like, that was the bottom and that was, whenever you see the pictures from the it just launches off, you see that.
So you're the astronaut. This is your home for most of the flight. 11, 12 days, whatever the length of the flight would be. Again, a little bit of orientation for you. The device that almost sticks out of the building does not go to the moon. That is the Launch Escape Tower. So if you're with me talking about the drama of Apollo 12 and Pete Conrad almost initiating the abort on that flight, that would have separated the command module right at that point. That solid rocket fires. Range safety officer blows up the rest of the Saturn V. That's what didn't happen on Apollo 12 or any other flight, fortunately. But this thing is jettisoned 3 minutes into flight because it's no longer of any use after the first stage of flight. So now what you have to picture is a little bit different than what you're actually looking at, and that is the lunar module is going to be against the nose of the command module. So let's do this one more time. Lunar module ascent stage, docking port on the top, descent stage beneath it, legs, so if it's on the lunar surface, it's like that. But against the command module, you have to kind of pick that thing up and put it against the nose, because we know the nose is connected to the top of the ascent stage. So it's service module, command module, ascent stage, descent stage, legs pointed in that direction. We get behind the moon at the engine at the base of the service module, fires in retrograde, slows you down to put you in orbit around the moon at a height of about 60 miles. Each orbit around the moon is going to take about 2 hours, just given the nature of the lunar gravity at that altitude. 2 astronauts will exit the command module, And through the docking port and inside the docking port is the hatch that opens up, kind of like in a submarine,